Well, it's that time again. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the interview with Craig Veltri.
Thank you, Megan Pennington. And welcome to the interview and Happy New Year. We begin 2026 by enacting the Revolving Door Policy. This April will mark his 42nd year, with the Butler Radio Network in Butler, Pennsylvania. Among his many roles and contributions, he is the host of the weekly local music showcase, The Grassroots Show, with co-host Utah Burgess of Shady Lady Production, which I've appeared on 5 times in the last 4 years. You can catch the Grassroots Show every Sunday evening on the Rock Station 97.7 FM in the Butler, Pennsylvania and Western Pennsylvania area. He has also been the radio voice of his alma mater, Slippery Rock University's football team, since 2004 and was inducted into their Media Hall of Fame in 2017. Recording in Nashville, Tennessee, and calling in from Butler, Pennsylvania, here he is, Bob Cupp. Bob, Happy New Year and welcome to the interview.
Happy New Year to you as well, Craig. It's exciting to be here on the other side for a change.
Well, and being on that side that you referred to, and in that greeting that you just gave to me, it should be plain and obvious that you are, in fact, a radio broadcaster. How early in your life did you decide that you wanted to be on the radio?
Probably going back to elementary school, definitely when I got into high school. But I had parents who were avid radio listeners going back to KDKA radio back in the day of Jack Bogut and the legendary Uncle Ed Chauncey. And they had a great morning show back in the day that Jack was host of, and he was such an interesting character and just a great broadcaster. And they would get up every day listening to that, and I would listen in and kind of built some steam toward off days when we'd have a snow day back in elementary and early high school days. I would pretend I was Jack Bogut pulling out 45s and then read the news like Uncle Ed on the bottom of the half hour and just pretend I was a DJ. So that kind of created the fascination back then. And then I got into a high school class that was led by a guy who was legendary in the community of Butler, Mr. Leonard, and they actually had a radio TV production class, and that got my first taste of it. And then I went to Slippery Rock University and got into that briefly, and that kind of led me here.
You mention all the ways that you were almost training yourself into being a broadcaster, a DJ, what have you. I hear that baritone voice. Were you always talking like that? And was that a way? It's like you have the voice for it already. You may as well go for it. Was that the feedback going on back then?
Probably not. No, I can dig out a tape from somewhere around my hiring time here at the Butler Radio Network, which I'm not even sure it was the Butler Radio Network back then. It was just simply WBUT. It was owned by a guy named Bob Brandon and his family, Brandon Communications. And I have a tape from about 1984 of my first trials on air as a evening disc jockey spinning records. And you had to do a brief local news surrounding Mutual News back then, which was a big radio news industry. It was not
wire service.
Yeah, but it was not good at all. I think it was just a learned thing. I never tried to develop a voice by, being Gary Owens or somebody, hey, this is time to be the DJ. It just kind of developed over the years. And I guess as I got older, it got deeper. So I don't try to do anything with it. It just kind of developed on its own. And maybe I was just meant to do this, I guess.
Well, saying you meant to do this and where you have been the last 42 years, you mentioned that you are from Butler. You went to school in Butler, Slippery Rock University, and you've remained in Butler for 42 years. What keeps you around the area?
Well, actually being able to work at a small market radio station that's been locally owned has been a big part of that. Being involved in the community, doing a lot of different things surrounding that. I had some opportunities to move on to bigger markets, but and I had some friends that were there trying to encourage me along, and I almost made a leap back about 19, probably late 87, early 88. A friend of mine wanted to hire me at what eventually would become the Force and then the X, which ironically is kind of tied into our network now of group of stations. But I chose at that time, that would have been a night job. It would have been hosting the nighttime. And I had just gone from nights, starting my career here at WBUT and WLER, and worked my way into the afternoon shift. And I had just been invited by Bob Brandon, the owner, to join him on the morning show and be the host, and then he would be the newsreader. And so that was sort of a dream, growing up in radio and not only listening to KDKA, but they would, flip over at 7 o'clock, listen to local news on WBUT. And early on in the days of that, it was a guy named Larry Berg who owned the stations, who was very well known in this area. Interviewed Elvis one time, and then Bob Brandon bought the station and he took over. So we had listened to these stations as well. And next thing you know, I'm, doing morning shows on it. So that was pretty cool. And monetarily, it wasn't going to pay me a whole lot more to go do nights. So I chose not to do it. And that friend has since gone on to New York City, Boston, and now he's a big program director in Philadelphia. So I chose not to jump at that time, and just the way things fell, doing mornings, and as the progression of our radio network developed and we went through a couple of different ownership changes.
Right.
I was just very well taken care of. I wasn't going to break the bank, but I had always said, if I can take care of myself and my family, I'd like to be a part of this community. And I've done a lot of different things over the years, got into some coaching at Butler High School. And so it just kind of kept me here. And I ran a DJ service for a while that helped supplement my income, starting after I got married, 1991, for about 15 years. Did weddings and all that fun stuff and made nice money doing that. But then as I had kids and they got involved in sports, I started getting involved in the coaching angle and that. And so I backed away from doing weddings. And honestly, I never got back into it because I just really don't miss that part of it.
Your roots are really deep in not just Butler Radio, but Butler, Pennsylvania. It's up, and we'll talk a little bit more about roots in a second. We're here with Bob Cupp of Butler Radio here on the Craig-Veltri Interview. For more on the Craig-Veltri Interview and for more on Scarfire Media, check out all of our social media, Facebook, Instagram, and keep your eye out on the podcast network for Mommy Rockstar featuring Megan Pennington, The Mothership, as I like to call it, Fire Pit, and the Cool Brother podcast. And thank you for listening to the Craig-Veltri Interview. This is probably the most obvious question that I could ask, but I do want to get the insider's perspective. I say it's obvious because the change in radio and the change in media is stark from 1986 until now. There was no satellite radio. There was no internet. There was cable television, but very limited. So from your perspective, what would you say is the biggest change that has happened, at least from your side of the microphone, in terms of radio?
Probably what we're doing right here, this Zoom thing. Computers have changed everything in this industry. Back, when I started, we were still spinning records. You had two turntables in the studio and you were queuing up, and you spent your time period each hour looking at the log and pulling out songs, pulling up commercials, and you had to play those on carts, which were like 8 tracks. So you'd have, your commercials and everything you were going to play on the left side of your studio, and your albums and 45s were on the other side, and you were working. I mean, you were constantly, flipping tapes in and out and queuing up records, and it became very active that way. Kept you busy, made time fly for sure. And then reel-to-reel tape became a real thing. That was probably the precursor to our 97.7. In the mornings for half the day, WBUT and WLER, which is 97.7, were streamed together. So they would simulcast the morning show, and then LER 97.7 would flip over to a tape format, and they were hot adult contemporary music at that time. And so that evolved eventually many years later to actually being a live entity in its own station as well. But it's just funny to see that transition from, the vinyl to the reel-to-reel and then off into computer, where everything we do now is computer-paced. Unfortunately, it also takes away jobs because we can automate our stations 24/7 if we'd like. But most of that is pretty much just, late afternoon, nights, overnight. We don't have to have anybody in the building. You used to have, if you were going to be 24 hours, you had somebody in the booth all the time.
Do you
Not
find it more efficient that way, having computers as opposed to all the analog stuff you described?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's very efficient. I mean, you can do so many other things. I'm working on programming a lot of times when I'm in the studio where you always had to do that separately, because you were so hands-on in the studio. Now everything's such a click of the button, and it's just a matter of programming it, putting it into the system. It's amazing. I produced the Grassroots show. We recorded on Monday mornings with, Utah and I, and we record that over, maybe an hour, 90-minute time period. Might take another hour to kind of edit, put that all together, and it's a matter of just piecing it together into a format in the computer, and it plays back on Sunday nights.
I've watched the process a couple of times, as I mentioned, being on the Grassroots show, at least seeing how the performance side of things, my performance side of things, and how the interview is done. And you guys do have such a great rapport, you and Utah. How did you guys wind up coming together on the Grassroots show?
Well, Utah, of course, owns Shady Lady Productions, a tremendous organization, supports not only musicians, but local entities, hometown businesses, charities. And he's done an incredible job in 2 decades. And, he's got that real deep passion for local music and the local musicians. And being a musician himself, I think, has a lot to do with that. But, he just believes in the hometown entity thing. And he was in on WBUT. We have 3 stations in our building here. WBUT, which is an AM and then a translator FM. And we have another sister station, local oldies station, WISR. And then, of course, the rock station, 97.7. And a lot of times when somebody has something going on, we bring them in and we give them the radio tour for the morning shows. So they get to visit all 3 of our studios in 15-minute blocks. And Utah was coming in to promote something that he had going on as Shady Lady Productions. And I'd, just met him a couple of times through what he was doing in his local music efforts with Shady Lady Productions. And we were just shooting the breeze before and after the interview segment to promote something that Shady Lady was doing. And we talked about our love of local music. I had traveled the scene, never was a musician, but loved going out to local shows. And then our passion for other national music, in particular the band UFO. And
great band.
Yeah. And we just struck up a relationship at that point. And as that got a little deeper, the more we talked and our love of local music, he brought up the idea, hey, why don't we try to put a show together? And so we did, and I always joke that I said, well, this will probably last 6 months because I don't know how much music we can dig up. And here we are. We just did our 700th episode in December of
Congratulations.
2025 here. So, yeah, thanks. So and it just and we still feel like we're just scratching the surface, but, it's opened us up to the local community. It's helped him promote his Shady Lady arm in his band, Noble Hops, and we've gotten involved as a radio station in some of the charitable efforts and helping to promote that stuff. And, I think it's just really opened up a lot of listeners' eyes, too, to how magnificent this local music scene is, not only in Butler, but Pittsburgh, tri-state area.
And in the furtherance of that show, not to mention, the Grassy Awards that you guys do every year, you do your festival every summer. Those remotes and those other promotions outside of radio, that's obviously a huge part that people may not realize about being a radio personality, all of those things. If you had it your way, would you lean more into that side of it, or do you just love being behind the microphone more?
I like both. I'm actually more comfortable behind the microphone because, I'm not out in front of somebody. If you make a mistake, it's not television. You can hide behind the microphone, if you will. So that's always been my more comfort zone. I've learned to, be out in front of people. Again, I've always said this even to my general managers. It's not my most comfortable place to be, but I've done it all my life. And, you learn, it's a learned art. You learn how to speak to people and handle things like that. But the music part of it is extremely fun. When you go to a festival, like, being able to work with Utah and host the Band Jam Grassroots Music Festival. I look forward to that weekend. That's not work to me, even though you're up there introducing bands. And I do try to do a little research for each band. And, you get to know some bands you don't. You introduce yourself to them. But it's just fun being a part of that and then being able to sit back, do a quick, 90-second intro, mention some sponsors, and then you get to sit back and watch a concert. And that part of it's pretty awesome.
I wouldn't say this next question is a fastball, but maybe it is a splitter. You are on the rock station. You're the program director as well of WBT, which is a country station. Just as a music listener, do you have a preference, one or the other?
I really don't. Going back to my parents, not only radio aficionados, but they were from a different generation. I mean, they came out of the Depression. My dad was a World War II vet. So they grew up at a different time. They got to see the evolution of radio, for sure, but they were big fans of all kinds of music, and they really turned me on to that, even not knowing, I think, early on. They just were fans of music. They enjoyed music. They were part of several organizations that would follow music or be involved in producing their own events with music. So that kind of tuned me into that. And my mom was really, I look back on it and I think, wow, this is really cool, because you don't realize she's doing it at that time. But back in the 70s and 80s, I was born in the early 60s. She would bring home after work. She worked at a local department store in downtown Butler, and she would walk across the street at lunchtime, and there was a Woolworths there. And they always had the top 10 45s of the week,
Right,
listed, and you'd walk in and she would grab those and bring them home, because she wanted me to be in touch with the pop music of the time. So that I was, and it was just her way to maybe bridge her era to mine. And it was pretty cool. It kind of blew me away when, as she kept doing that as I was entering junior high school. And next thing you know, she brings home Pink Floyd, The Wall. And I said, "You realize what you just brought home?" She didn't have a clue. But, so they turned me on to music that way. So I love all kinds of music. I've got older brother and sister. They grew up in the late 50s, early 60s. So they had all the doo-wop records, and then they would tell me about the local music scene back then, where you could go in downtown Butler and pick out 4 or 5 different bands out of Pittsburgh that were coming in at that time. So I learned a love of all kinds of music. And obviously when we were simulcasting, we were just adult contemporary, both sides, BUT and LER, and that would evolve into the formats that we have today. So, I knew a little bit of everything. And then obviously, DJing weddings and stuff, you really get to know a lot of different music at that point, whether you want to or not. So, it just had an opportunity to have my hand in a lot of different music. And, that's some of it. That's a learned art. Others is just the passion of what sounds good, what you feel good, and what you think listeners are going to enjoy.
Well, personal opinion aside, how about professionally? Do you find that genre, in as far as what radio and what record stores segment genre as, are you finding that it's more blurry than ever?
Yeah, well, I think it is now, especially because of streaming. You can pull music up, how many people's phones are all kinds of different music. So I never enjoyed the format that radio dove into very heavily. When I was growing up, I was listening to these different stations, and there was a great station in Pittsburgh, 13Q, and you could hear Kenny Rogers play, and the very next song might be Alice Cooper. It was all over the board, and I loved that.
My kind of station.
Exactly. I mean, that was your phone of the day, your Spotify playlist of the day, maybe. So, I really enjoyed that. And then next thing you know, you get into radio and you learn the business. And now we've got to be this format. We're adult contemporary, we're country, and at that time, I mean, I think they had 5 genres. It was going to be rock, country, pop, and then it branched out. And next thing you know, you had 4 different versions of country, and you had 5 different versions of pop, and it just got really crazy at that time. I thought, man, I don't like this. So in fact, I started doing a hard rock show that I've been doing for almost 25 years now on the rock station Saturday nights, just because I didn't like the music we were playing in the day. And I was like, nobody plays this stuff. Nobody, simple things like Def Leppard, Judas Priest. Who was playing that at that time? Now Judas Priest is selling cars, with commercials.
Can you imagine?
So, it just, this experience, especially locally, has given me the opportunity to be involved in a lot of different angles of music, which is awesome.
Not to mention, you've been able to parlay that into sports as well. You mentioned that you have been a football coach and you have had the opportunity to work with Slippery Rock University on their radio broadcast. You've been the play-by-play man since 2009. How'd you fall into that?
Well, just being here at the radio station, we obviously cover local sports, and WBUT has been the Butler High School hub for football and basketball for a lot of years. And, going back to the 80s, I mean, we had some incredible people on broadcasts over the years, going back to, Jim Lockheiser, who was a great voice and did all kinds of sports from football to Lernerville Speedway pre-race shows. And so you kind of, there's a necessity for, we don't have a big staff. So there comes a time where you might have to hop on a broadcast and maybe do some color for high school or do a play-by-play. I'm not a basketball expert at all, but I've had to jump in when somebody was ill and call a basketball game out of the blue. And we had started carrying Slippery Rock University football on one of our smaller stations, WISR at the time, and a friend who was actually a co-host of my morning show on WBUT became the play-by-play guy. And over time, they needed a color guy, so I hopped in on that. And then a couple of years later, he decided to move on from the industry, and that's when I became the play-by-play guy. And being a Slippery Rock guy, I went to the games anyway. My dad was a big football fan, had season tickets for Butler High School to Slippery Rock University. So he always went to the games, and I would tag along every once in a while and just fell in love with Slippery Rock University's football program over the years. And then, got to know the coaches and such. And since taking over as play-by-play guy, I look forward to the falls, giving up the time to go follow the Rock.
You've talked already about the mechanics of running a radio show. Do you find, how do I put this? Do you find the challenge of doing a radio broadcast more front end, as in you do more research and then you're prepared for the game, as opposed to doing a radio show where it just seems like you grab the records and you get everything going and you're going 75 miles an hour for 3 hours in a different way?
I think a lot of that nowadays, thanks to computers and the technology we have, you do a lot more pre-prep. A lot of it's reactionary as well. I mean, a football game, certainly, you're doing prep to know, your team, the players, their numbers, who they are. You study the other team because you want to learn their numbers before you do a game. So you're not saying, Indiana running back up the middle. Oh, Slippery Rock's Joe Smith tackled him. You've got to do a lot of prep work that way. We do a coach's show, and that gives you some insight into what to expect. So you do a lot of pregame stuff, and even in our broadcast end of things, I'm our sports director. So each day I literally start my first hour at home, digging into sports, gathering all that even before I walk in the door here, so that I can walk in and jump on the air and do everything a morning show is going to do, but also have the sports for our 3 stations involved in that. So that's a lot of pregame prep. And at the same time, you're just watching the world. I consume a lot of news and information, literally 20 hours a day. I sleep 5 if I'm lucky. So, 19 hours, I guess. You consume, you pay attention, you know what's going on. You try to know what's going on in the world. You're not an expert on anything. You're just a casual observer like anybody else. But a lot of that would be, pre-game prep, if you will, for the reactions you're going to have when you're live on the air.
I'll give you 2 more questions here. First one being, Slippery Rock University as a program itself. Last year they made it to the semifinals of Division II. They're missing the playoffs this year. As someone who's the observer of Slippery Rock University, what does the future look like for them 2026 going forward, especially after a season that was pretty disappointing?
Yeah, I mean, they lost a couple of games. It was like shocking because they've been so very good, going back to the great Hall of Fame coach, Dr. George Mahalik. I mean, they built such a significant program, and it became a significant program on the national stage. And Sean Lutz has carried that on and just made it even better. And, there's a guy that was part of George Mihalik's staff for 20 plus years when he took over the program as the head coach. But right now, this is a big time changing landscape in the world of college football. You've seen it at the Division I level, just with the college football playoff, but the way the portal allows players to jump around, and now the payment plans that everybody has. I mean, there's millions of dollars was being thrown around for coaches for a lot of years who would pick up and leave in a falling leaf off of a tree.
Looking at you, Bobby Petrino.
Yeah, exactly. That was going on. Now you've got that going on with players because they're getting paid, and that has affected. That trickle down from Division I is now affecting Division II.
How so?
In the fact that somebody can pack up and leave very quickly. In an opposite way, a lot of times Slippery Rock was benefiting in schools at the Division II level. They were benefiting by guys that weren't involved in a maybe Division I higher program, whether it's FCS or FBS. They may have been a fringe player. They'd been offered out of high school the opportunity to play at a bigger school, and they go there, and now all of a sudden they're standing on the sideline. They might have been the stud at high school, and all of a sudden they're standing around, and they would maybe matriculate down to Division II to become a starter and get an opportunity to play. Well, now the whole landscape of that Division I level, they've reduced the roster sizes, and the money has become so involved that now it's actually having an opposite effect, where guys from places like Slippery Rock University, if they turn out to be standouts on the field at Division II and they have a certain size and ability, they're being grabbed to be pulled up. Great example of that was this past season alone. The top two wide receivers coming out of Slippery Rock's Final Four appearance when they played Ferris State in the national semifinals, their top two wide receivers were still with the program to begin this past year, played in the spring game as Slippery Rock was preparing for their season. After the spring game, Division I programs came in, offered him a boatload of money, and dragged him in because there were two portals you could go through. Now, they've changed that this year. But Slippery Rock lost their top two wide receivers after their spring game to come into this year. That's one of the reasons why they had a year like they had. So now you've had that opposite effect. Instead of somebody coming from a Division I program joining your program, you're starting to lose them up, which was good for the guys. If they were going to get an opportunity to play. It worked out for one of them, not the other, but you've seen an opposite effect of what Slippery Rock was gaining from in the past. Now they started to lose a little bit.
Well, let's talk about you and 42 years as a professional broadcaster. This is a field that, as long as you're lucid and as long as you are still in a position, people really don't tend to retire from this. I mean, Bob Uecker literally was doing games and then died within the same year in his 90s. So I bring that up, and forgive the morbid example, but is that the end game for you? Is there a retirement plan in place for you, or are you going to do this up until you take your last breath?
I really can't answer that right now. I've had a lot of people, I turned 61 this year. So some people say knocking on the door of 62, what are you going to do? I don't know. I haven't really thought about it. To me, it was a number that keeps getting thrown back at me. So I really don't pay attention to it. I don't have an end game per se right now. I guess it would depend on what my wife is going to do in the future and what that would entail and what we plan to do. I know in the wintertime, I sure would like to go to a much warmer place, and I have a lot of friends that do that. And so we, sample size that a little bit and go, boy, I could get used to this. But
you've mentioned Myrtle a couple of times in our conversation.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll go to Hilton Head in February and visit another friend another month later down in Florida. I could get used to that for sure, but I don't know. I love what I do. I can't believe the grassroots show that Utah and I've done. We've been doing that, 13 years now, 700 episodes. I love doing my Saturday night show. I used to do that live for 12 straight years. And then my wife kind of said, would you stay home on a Saturday? Because I would go do a Slippery Rock football game and jump into the booth to do a Saturday night show for 2 hours. So I do pre-record that, but I love putting it together. The mornings, and I've been doing mornings now for probably 35 plus years. You don't ever get used to getting up in the morning, but you just do it and it becomes part of your fabric. And I enjoy that. There's something different every day. I mean, I'm diving into sports, I'm diving into entertainment, I'm getting to play music, talking to people that have hometown entities, the camaraderie we have at our radio stations. I mean, we have an incredible, incredible staff here. And there are a lot of people that have been in the business for a long time and a lot of people in the business at these stations. That makes it enjoyable. We have fun together and the days go fast. So I don't have any anticipation of where it's going to be, when is that time going to draw near. I think the key part is you talked about being lucid and being able to discuss, as I do get older, things don't work as well. The mind doesn't always connect with the tongue like it used to. You have to think about things maybe a little more. Things are a little slower. As long as that doesn't worsen, I've got a friend and colleague that works on WISR. He's pushing 50 years in the business here and at these stations. So I don't know. We'll see where it leads. Lord willing and the creek don't rise, I won't float down it.
Well, we have a nice way of closing here on the Craig-Veltri interview, Bob. It's called the No Kidding Questionnaire, a couple of rapid fire questions. First thing that comes to your mind, whenever you're ready, and away we go. Childhood celebrity crush.
Childhood celebrity crush. So I would imagine you're asking female side of things, huh?
I would.
Well,
there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah, right. No, it depends if it would be a sports figure. I was always a Dale Earnhardt fan. Loved watching the Man in Black drive a race car and run people.
I grew up in Charlotte. He's been deified in his hometown of Kannapolis. So
yeah, but I would have to say Olivia Newton-John, being a audiophile back in the day, and my mom would bring home those 45s, and Olivia in the early 70s became popular, and I thought she was very, very cute. And she had a great voice, and I just loved her music. So, I guess Olivia Newton-John would be the first that comes to mind that way.
Very sweet and very low key, very versatile. I definitely agree. Follow up to that question. Being your celebrity crush, is that the kind of woman you found yourself pursuing and perhaps marrying?
I think initially, but no, not at all. So, yeah, that was the early 70s, I guess, when I jumped into the 80s. It was a different world. But I've been fortunately married for 35 years to an incredible woman who puts up with a lot of my shenanigans of going off and doing things, and has done that for a lot of years. And I've tried to back things off. I mentioned I coached for a lot of years and actually led the high school bowling program at Butler, boys and girls, for over a decade. And I did bow out of that because I was just taking way too much time away from her, because we were starting to become empty nesters at that time. But, I don't know. I don't know. I can't relate what my wife, she became a different entity, that celebrity crush back in when I met her in the 80s.
Well, you mentioned schooling. What was your favorite subject in school?
I actually, going way back, I loved spelling. I was always really good at spelling. And when we'd have, elementary spelling bees or spelling quizzes, I always aced those. That was the one thing I was good at, because I was not the most studious person in the world, but spelling was cool. And I'll tell you, when I went to Slippery Rock University, I wasn't sure I wanted to go to college. I was going to become I was going to work on cars. So I went to the Votech here in Butler and took a auto diesel class for a couple of years, and that taught me that I didn't want to do that full time for a living. But hey, I got to build a car out of it, and I still have it today.
What kind of car is it?
It was an old Plymouth 72 Plymouth Duster.
Oh,
built it from the ground up with a dear friend, and built the engine myself, and it worked. So that was cool. But then I realized that after going through that, it was like, yeah, I better go to college. And then I went to college. I'm like, oh, I'm not cut out for this, but stuck with it. And I got into the communication program, and I loved the communication program. I had a great advisor at Slippery Rock University, who sadly has passed, in Bill Barnett, but he taught me a lot. And I was only, the only disappointing thing for my Slippery Rock University career is I got hired midway through my sophomore year here at the radio station. So I ended up moving back home, and I commuted for the final time until I graduated. And I missed a lot of the connections that you build during college. Now, I was able to maintain friendships with original friends and roommates and such, but I lost a lot of what they would eventually go on and do. The whole crew I hung around with, there was a new frat that started at Slippery Rock University. They joined that, and things like that. You lose that connection a little bit, but communication at Slippery Rock University was fantastic. It's an incredible school, and it just continues to grow. I'm excited to see that Slippery Rock University not only successful in football, but it's one of the strongest institutions in the state of Pennsylvania, and I think in the entire Northeast.
I've hung around Slippery Rock for a little bit. It is a very beautiful campus, and everybody who has ever gone there swears by the place. So, yeah, you're not the first person I've heard say this. Moving on to the questionnaire, what occupation rather, other than your own, would you like to attempt?
Wow, I've been doing this way too long to change now, but that's a really, really good question. I don't even know if I could answer that. Because I've been able to do a lot of different things here at the radio station, and you get involved in different aspects, and people drag you into stuff, and you get involved in the community. I don't know. Maybe I don't know if I've seen the promoting end of things that Utah does, and the angst and anxiety that can come with that. I'd always wanted to own my own kind of Jurgles kind of place for years.
A music venue.
Yeah, yeah. So if I had to do anything else, I probably would want to do that. I always said if I won the lottery, I was going to build, a place like Penn's Peak out in Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania, which I just think is an unbelievable facility. So I guess I would get into that. Outside of that, I don't know. I've been around too long. I'd retire.
Well, you've mentioned a couple of candidates on the other side of the coin. So what job would you, I don't care how many bags of money are handed to you, would you never want to attempt?
Watching what my dad went through in the steel industry, probably wouldn't go to work for what was known as Armco Steel back in the day, because I know that was very stressing for him. It was a difficult life. I have a lot of friends that have worked at that community steel plant, and I have a lot of respect for them. I also know that working out in the cold, whatever profession that is this time of year, we're talking today, and we have a winter storm moving in, and as of right now, it was about 20 degrees, feeling like 5. All due respect to everybody that works out in that. God bless you. That's not something I want to do.
Well, you've mentioned your love of cars. What is your go-to food on a road trip?
Go to on a road trip. Oh boy. I've always loved a good burger. So I love trying different burgers at different, wherever it.
All right. Insert local pub here. They want to make the Bob Cupp burger. What's on it?
What's on it? Well, there's gotta be a tomato. And it's funny too, because it took me till about I was 13. Wouldn't need a tomato. My mom would put a tomato. No, I don't want it. I hated it. Loved ketchup. Didn't like a tomato till now. I can eat a tomato like an apple. It's got to have a tomato on it. Has to. Love lettuce. If there's a good onion around, I can take or leave an onion, but it has to have lettuce and tomato on it, and probably ketchup.
Okay. Well, now that we have the centerpiece of the entree, if you could have dinner with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be?
I would have loved to have had a visit with Dale Earnhardt, just to pick his brain a little bit, because I thought he was such a unique character.
As a race fan, what captured your imagination?
When I started picking up racing, and I remember when the 747 flew into Daytona, and that was the first broadcast. That really captured my attention at that time. And then when Dale Earnhardt went to the black number 3. He was driving the Wrangler for one. And I thought, who's this guy? This is a character. I was a Richard Petty fan because that was the name. And all of a sudden, I started following this. Who's this guy in this 3 car? And all of a sudden, he goes to the black number 3, and I just loved that. It was just that mysterious. That's what I was. I had developed into a big heavy metal fan back in the early '80s, and I think that just fit that genre. I was always wearing a black T-shirt, and just kind of grabbed on, and now all of a sudden you had this character who was really starting to come to life in that sport. So I would, that and probably somebody in the rock world, whether it, I don't know if it would have been Ozzy, but certainly anybody from Judas Priest, one of my favorite fans. I'll tell you, one of the coolest characters that I would have loved to have met, saw him perform close up a bunch of times, but would have loved to have a visit with Danny Joe Brown, who was the lead vocalist of Molly Hatchet. And that whole original band is now passed. I mean, some of those guys died, and, Danny Joe was 53. Dwayne Rowland, guitarist, was 53 when they died. And they were one of my favorite bands when I really got into rock music in the late 70s when they debuted. Just thought they were such a cool band. But Danny Joe Brown was such a great front man. Loved his voice, but he also just had a way of grabbing onto the crowd and making them part of the band. That would have been a good conversation to have a meal.
Yeah, Flirting with Disaster is definitely still a staple of any classic rock playlist, and yeah, those guys could boogie with the best of those Southern boogie guys for sure. I put them up there with the ZZ Top and 38 Special. I like them too. Um, what is your biggest pet peeve?
The way radio has limited their playlist, and a lot of that is the format radio situation, especially big market stations being taken over and owned by just a couple of companies. Won't mention any names, but we know who they are. So when you listen to big market stations and their playlist of about 300 songs, I've always hated that, despised that. That's one of the reasons why I've stayed where I'm at. I'm blessed to work at a radio station where the owners.
Devil's advocate, if I may insert this, can you blame the audience for that as well? Because they would argue that people want familiarity, so we're just giving them what they want in that aspect.
Yeah, somewhat, but I think some of that's been forced on people. We can have that discussion about musicians, and those that get ignored when you're playing, and people would rather play the jukebox. Yeah, there's that faction that is that same kind of thing where they might want to hear that popular song, but I don't want to hear it 4 times a day, every single day, in that limited playlist. I think that's where we've been successful in being allowed to develop our own playlist and have quadruple the amount that the local, bigger market stations are playing. That's what I want to hear. That's why I was, going back to 13Q, we got to hear a little bit of everything. Well, I think we're being able to share that, and we program our country station the same way. We don't limit the audience of what they can hear. You could tune in every day and probably hear something different outside of the current rotation of popular songs. That to me is probably my biggest pet peeve in radio. We had limited ourselves so much, put ourselves in such a box for a lot of years. And I think that's relaxing a little bit, especially including the local musicians. We're seeing that expand quite a bit, even in this tri-state area.
Last question of the questionnaire normally. What is the best advice that anyone has ever given you?
Don't take no for an answer. The squeaky wheel gets the grease was my mom's favorite comment.
I've heard that one too.
Yeah. And if you want something, make it known. Don't be shy about it. Ask for it. The worst they can tell you is no. So never say quit, because especially in this business, it's a tough business to get into. It's even tougher now because of the opportunities are limited, because we are computerized, and it's tough to get in the door. I mean, thank goodness we still have local sports broadcasts, because we need somebody in the studio, and that's where a lot of young people get their start. A gentleman who I work with today, who's my co-host in the morning, and you hear him on 97.7, Tyler Friel. It's how he got his start, jumping in, doing little things and trying to build his way up. And, it's a tough business to get into, but that just, I think, really kind of highlights that you can't take no for an answer. You got to keep knocking on the door. My mother taught me that many years ago, and I had to knock on the door 2 different years at these radio stations. I just wanted to empty their wastebaskets and hang around for a while. And the first year they giggled at me when I was a freshman in college. And the second year I came back again, and they sort of giggled, but went, well, he's knocking on the door. And a few months later, they decided to make a change with somebody, and I got in the door. And that was April of 1984. And I've been here ever since.
Now, this is the bonus question that I give for anybody I've found that has been a teacher, and you qualify as being a coach. I call this the Lonnie Billard Memorial question, which goes like this. Maybe not the best advice you've ever given a student, but what is the most common advice you found yourself giving your players, your students?
We will all make mistakes because we're human, and you can't let that mistake drag you down. Feelings can be hurt very easily, and you can give up on yourself very easily. It's those that can find a way to come around that and learn from that mistake and move on. And, keep a bright smile. And, even when it's tough and you might feel like crawling into a hole or crying your eyes out, put a smile on your face and move forward, and don't show them that you're defeated. Find a way to win. That's probably the biggest thing I could say.
Well, this is the part of the program that I believe that every guest should enjoy the most, Bob. It is time for shameless self-promotion. You practically live at Butler Radio. Where can we hear you on the air and out and about in the Butler area? Fire away.
Well, I host what is called the WBUT Breakfast Club on 1050 AM, 97.3 FM, and WBUT.com. Shameless self-promotion, but we're on every day, 5:30 to 9 a.m. I do a News at Noon broadcast on that station as well. And then, of course, as I'm on the air doing live, when we go into a news break, I hop over to 97.7, join Jay Klein, and do sports. And then I am on the air 3 to 7 on 97.7 as the Rock Doctor. Now, we'll let the cat out of the bag. I'm not here 24/7. So that is a voice track opportunity. And I do that right before the show comes on by the time I walk out the door here. But it can be live. The day Eddie Van Halen died, I had to jump back into the car and come back into the studio because the world needed to talk about this, so
sad day.
Yeah. So, things like that happen. We are able to go live, but that's recorded because it's on till 7 o'clock at night. And then obviously the Grassroots show Sunday nights, 7 o'clock, 97.7 FM, 977rocks.com. That streams. It's archived every Sunday night at 7. I do my local, or well, it's not local, but that's the local music show. Saturday night, 10 to midnight, show called The Rock Fabrique. Stole that basically from a German nightclub that I visited one time near Augsburg outside of Munich. There's some really cool clubs over there. They play American heavy metal and hard rock, and they're called The Rock Fabrique. So I do a Saturday show in their honor, and done that for 25 years now, where we play, being that we're a rock station now, because when I started that, we were a hot AC station. And so I was just trying to tick off the world because I was mad we were hot AC. But now that we're rock, it gives me an opportunity to play more fringe stuff, maybe new stuff that's coming out, because obviously rock, general mainstream rock may not focus on some of the bands that are still putting out material. Some say rock is dead. I disagree wholeheartedly. And deep cuts, we get to play some deep cuts and things like that. So that's where I'm at. And I used to be out in the community a lot more. Now it's pretty much spending time at home with my wife, kids, and grandkids. And you can see me out and about. And anytime there's a Slippery Rock University football game.
Yep. Yeah. If rock is dead, somebody needs to tell Youngblood. Bob, I will say this: just getting to sit on the other side of you, any of the times that I've been in studio or on the call, it is. I can see the techniques that you employ, and I've actually learned a lot just watching and listening to you. So getting to actually talk to you and get to fill in the blanks a little bit has really been quite intriguing and quite refreshing, and I hope our listeners feel the same. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Craig-Veltri interview, and once more, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, Craig. Thanks for what you do. This is an awesome format that you folks do, and I know your involvement with Megan, and I just salute everybody that does this kind of thing, and I'm honored to be on this side of it and join you here today.
The pleasure is all mine, Bob. Thanks again.
Thank you. Happy New Year.
3, 2, 1. The Craig-Veltri interview, where Craig-Veltri interviews wonderful people, is a production of Scarfire Media, the voice of the independent artist. Written and edited by Craig-Veltri. Your announcer is Megan Pennington. The opening theme, Shut Up, I Love You, written by Trenton Chandler and Craig-Veltri, performed by Craig-Veltri, produced by Jack Gavin. The closing theme, Shine On, written and performed by Craig-Veltri, produced by Brian Cole. As I've been mentioning on the program, next week, Megan Pennington and I will be in Nashville, Tennessee, finishing up the vocals, thus finishing up the album Inside the Cabin by Moonshine Vagabonds. We are still on schedule to release the single Inside the Cabin on February 13th and releasing the full record late March, early April of 2026. Time now to update the event calendar, because you must know where I am at all times. Friday, January 2nd, I'll be at Grapes in a Glass in Canton, Ohio from 7 to 10 p.m. Then back to the Berg on Saturday, January 3rd. Moonshine Vagabonds, myself and Mama Meg at Bigham Tavern, Bridgewater, PA, from 7 to 10 p.m. Brought to you by Root Down Entertainment. For full dates, visit my website, craig-veltri.bandzoogle.com. For booking info, including full band and this podcast, email me at craig-veltri-official@gmail.com. You can find the interview on Facebook by searching the Craig Veltri Interview, YouTube at Craig Veltri Music, and you can find me on Instagram, or as my old roommate, the Tommy Thomas, used to call it, Instagirl, at craig.veltri. For Bob Cupp, I'm Craig Veltri, and this has been the Craig Veltri Interview. Happy New Year, one and all. Let's do better this time, and shine on.